Good evening. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins wrote, "There is something infantile in the presumption that somebody else has to have a responsibility to give your life meaning and point. The truly adult view, by contrast, is that our lives are as meaningful and as full and as wonderful as we choose to make it." In a world of billions of God believers, however, the presence of an omniscient being interested in our affairs is central. Tonight we explore religion and ask, do we need God? It is Thursday, and I am Madam Speaker. My guests are author of You Have to Be Gay to Know God, Sia Khumalo, Yanni Skuman, who is the president of the South African Secular Society, and our jury, Dr. Farid Esak, head of religious studies at the University of Johannesburg, Gogo Dineo Ndlanzi, a traditional healer, Dr. Matole Motsecha, chairperson of the Kara Heritage Institute, and Tabiso Bengu, who is also a Sangoma. Good evening to all of my guests. Thank you so much for being with me. I hope that we have a great discussion. It is an emotive topic, and I think we have to keep our responses as succinct and to the point as we possibly can. Sia Khumalo, let's perhaps start with you. You challenge homophobia in your book, including inside the church.
Yes.
And you also paint an aching picture of rejection and of wanting to belong. Why do we need God?
Well, Iman, the answer begins, there's an assumption in the question. And that assumption is that we human beings are rational thinking beings, that we have a responsibility to think thoughts that are coherent, that make sense. I mean, that's why we're having a discussion like this one. And this assumption is going to be very important when you start dealing with artificial technology, biotechnology, and all of those things. But there's a rule that an effect cannot be greater than its cause. We can't assume that we're logical thinking beings who have moral responsibilities unless we assume that our cause is the same. If our cause is random or arbitrary, if we don't even acknowledge the possibility of a cause, if we don't have any metaphysical framework for our moral viewpoint, then it's just tyranny that one human being can impose on another. You can't move from a whole bunch of observations about how the world works and from those say this is how people ought to behave.
There's so much in there. I mean, it's so dense for me to begin to unpick piece by piece. Chew on that for a little bit and turn a question to you, Yanni. God believers will argue that without religion, you can't find purpose, hope, and the world will be an immoral place. From a secular perspective, first of all, just define what secularism is, because I thought I understood what it was, and we had an offline conversation. It wasn't quite what I'd envisaged or imagined. Maybe start by defining it for us, and then to answer the question.
Okay. So secularism is about the volume and the place of the religious voice in the public square. And the secularist position is that religions, religious attitudes, and non-religion can exist in the public square. And it's just that there should be no greater privilege given to one voice. So essentially it's about equality. And I believe this is why I've heard Prof. Farid Esak mention that South Africa is a great place to be a Muslim. It's because of this concept of secularism that is adopted by our South African constitution. And
yet religions are also the bastions, in some ways, of one or other type of superiority. Some religions say they're better than others, and that's why you have, whole libraries and armies of people who are devoted to the work of propagating their faith or the other. Well, one faith or another. Yeah, exactly. I think there's something like 33,000 denominations of Christianity alone. So it's a very confusing book. So, Sia, I want us to go back to how you define the need for God. What need, or what role does God serve in your life and the lives of others who might believe the same as you?
Well, the role God serves is, he's just a consistent logical conclusion. If my world is a world in which there are things that ought to be done, it means that there's somebody beyond the universe who provides is and isn't, shoulds or shouldn'ts, I mean.
How do we know that? How do we know that?
Because we don't know.
What is your authority, I should ask?
We don't actually know this. That's why we call it faith. What we do know is that if we believe that the universe is entirely naturalistic, that it's entirely material, then there's no use in speaking about shoulds and shouldn'ts. Nothing is right or wrong. It just is.
I need to disagree with you there.
Go ahead, Yanni.
I actually think that as somebody who is a non-believer, I embrace the concept of humanism, which means you can find your purpose and your meaning just by knowing you're on the same planet with other conscious creatures who are able to feel suffering and feel happiness and flourish. And I believe that I can use that landscape to answer moral questions. So I can find meaning in knowing that I can make someone else happy. I have to create my own meaning, and for me, I think it's more powerful, it's more empowering to have to create your own meaning than just to go by some dictator's meaning for you.
So God is a dictator in your mind?
Well,
religions are dictators or dictatorships?
Well,
yeah, well, it is unfortunately like that.
Can I just interject? So 2 things. The first is I love her honesty in that she's talking about my meaning. I find, I create.
But isn't religion supremely personal? I mean, it is, isn't it?
I'm not sure. But what I do know is that the honesty here, she's called it her meaning, meaning she cannot expect other people to live up to it. Yet we hold this expectation over everyone, even put people in jails when they perpetrate severe violations of moral laws, such as murder. This doesn't make sense if it's my meaning. Why has it become our meaning all of a sudden? Nobody gets to opt out. That doesn't make sense. And if we're going to call God a dictator, I've always said, then you have to rescind your right to tap into that moral framework that a transcendent God provides. You can never use it again because you've just called its source evil. There's no good and evil in that instance.
The only assumption that I'm actually making is that we need to agree on the basis of morality based on human flourishing and suffering. That's the only assumption I'm making. Based on that, I think things can be derived and a rational moral system can be built on that alone.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, when we think about why we need God, I mean, I'm thinking a lot of our human ritual is, pivots around a concept of one God or another in terms of the things that we do, burials and deaths and births and things like that. Or in giving comfort, God provides an essential balm to people who are wounded, and this you'll hear the world. And they provide hope, the thought of reunification with someone who's passed away, that you will see them again. Do you think, as my opening premise said, quoting Richard Dawkins, that perhaps we're too infantile, that our need is unnecessary on someone else, when actually we have human agency to give ourselves our own hope and to take charge of our own affairs?
Now, in a few years, an engineer is going to be designing a robot, deliberating on those questions, and those robots will not be interested in giving us comfort or burying us when we die, because we decompose. Artificial intelligence and human intelligence are the same thing.
Where does it leave God, then, in your construct?
What I'm saying is, if there's no God, artificial intelligence and human intelligence are the same thing. They're interchangeable.
So what?
Exactly.
Also, I'd like to know, how does your book contribute to those types of moral questions, those very hard and difficult questions? Artificial intelligence. Should we colonize other planets? What about veganism? I think some of these doctrines are way outdated in the 21st century.
That's what my book says.
Where does secularism find hope, find comfort, find peace?
Okay, so secularism is not a worldview. So being a secularist, you don't even have to be non-religious. You can also be a religious person and believe that all voices should be equal in the public space. But as a humanist, I can derive my meaning and purpose and answer those types of questions based on like I said before, my knowledge of people who are conscious creatures on this earth and can feel suffering and experience happiness.
I'm sorry, what happened to
Let's hold that
survival of the
thought. Let's hold that thought for a second, if we can, see Khumalo. So my jury weighs in when we return. Don't go away. This is Madam Speaker.